The story opens with one of the most mysterious moments in ancient scripture, a scene mentioned only briefly, yet powerful enough to spark centuries of debate. In Jude 9, Michael the Archangel confronts Satan in a dispute over the body of Moses. It is a striking encounter, not because of displays of force or dramatic violence, but because it reveals a deeper truth about authority, purpose, and the unseen conflicts that shape the human story. This rare glimpse into a supernatural confrontation raises questions that continue to fascinate scholars, believers, and historians alike. Why was the body of Moses so important? Why did two powerful beings meet at that moment? And what does this reveal about the larger struggle between good and evil? This episode also challenges assumptions about spiritual conflict. Instead of escalating the dispute, Michael responds with restraint, invoking a higher authority rather than relying on his own power. This simple act carries profound meaning. True strength often lies in knowing when to stand firm, when to speak, and when to trust in something greater. It is a reminder that unseen battles are not always fought the way we might expect. In this video, we explore the context, the symbolism, and the lasting impact of this extraordinary moment. Whether you are familiar with the passage or hearing about it for the first time, you are about to discover why this brief verse has captured so much attention across history. If you enjoy deep dives into hidden stories, forgotten history, and ancient mysteries, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more thought-provoking content to life and ensures you never miss an episode. Deuteronomy 34:6 deepens the mystery surrounding Moses' final moments, revealing that his burial was not conducted by any human hand, but by God himself, and in a place no one could ever locate. This detail connects seamlessly with the earlier glimpse of the dispute involving Michael the Archangel, enriching the narrative with layers of intention and purpose. Rather than ending Moses' story with a simple farewell, the text draws attention to a deliberate act of concealment, suggesting that Moses' legacy required not only honor but protection. In the ancient world, the remains of revered figures often became objects of devotion, sometimes even of misplaced worship, and the secrecy surrounding Moses' resting place hints at a divine effort to preserve the heart of the faith from drifting into practices that could overshadow its true foundation. As we weave this into the mysterious encounter between Michael and Satan, the secrecy takes on an even more intriguing meaning. If Moses' body held symbolic or spiritual significance that could be misused, then the supernatural confrontation described in Jude becomes more than a passing mention. It becomes part of a larger tapestry in which heavenly beings act to safeguard a legacy meant to guide, not to be idolized. The burial in an unknown valley, far from the reach of anyone who might turn it into a shrine or a tool of influence, reinforces the idea that Moses, despite his monumental role, was never meant to become the center of devotion. His life was a vessel for a message, and his death was shaped to protect that message from being distorted by those who might elevate the messenger above the truth he carried. The secrecy also echoes the final scene of Moses' life, where he views the promised land from a distance but does not enter it. This moment is often portrayed as bittersweet, yet Deuteronomy's emphasis on divine involvement in his burial suggests that his death was not an ending marked by loss, but a transition marked by intention. Moses completed his mission, guided a nation through trials and revelations, and stood as a mediator between the people and the divine. His hidden burial underscores that his story was never about earthly monuments or physical memorials. It was about the continuity of a journey that would be carried forward by those he had led. In this light, the interplay between the hidden grave and the celestial dispute portrays a world where spiritual dynamics operate behind the scenes to preserve the integrity of sacred history. The secrecy becomes a form of protection, not only for Moses but for the generations that would follow, ensuring that their focus remained on the path set before them rather than on relics or places that might distract from the greater mission. The narrative invites readers to consider how often stories carry more beneath the surface than their brief mentions suggest. and how the simplest lines sometimes reveal the most profound truths. By linking Moses' hidden burial with the supernatural tension surrounding his remains, the story expands from a historical account into a reflection on purpose, humility, and the unseen guardianship woven throughout ancient tradition. It reminds us that some legacies are preserved not through monuments or visible markers, but through deliberate obscurity that keeps the message alive without allowing it to be overshadowed by the messenger. The possibility that an adversarial force sought to use Moses' body to mislead the people adds yet another layer to the unfolding narrative, connecting naturally with both the divine secrecy of his burial and the rare confrontation described in Jude. When viewed together, these elements form a continuous thread, a story in which unseen intentions and hidden dangers move beneath the surface of the historical account. Moses had been the central figure in Israel's journey, a leader whose presence shaped the identity of a nation. And it is not difficult to imagine how easily his physical remains could have been transformed into a powerful symbol in the wrong hands. In ancient cultures, the graves of revered individuals often became places of influence, capable of shaping belief and behavior, and this potential for misuse casts a long shadow over the circumstances surrounding Moses' final moments. Within that shadow, the idea emerges that an enemy might have wished to twist the memory of Moses into something he never intended. A shrine built around his tomb could have become a rallying point for misplaced devotion, turning attention away from the path he spent his life directing others toward. Even more unsettling is the possibility that someone could have used his body as a tool to manipulate the people, crafting illusions or narratives that distorted the meaning of his legacy. The text does not describe these possibilities directly, but the secrecy, the celestial dispute, and the divine involvement together suggest that the risk was real enough to warrant extraordinary measures. This interpretation deepens the significance of Michael's restraint in the supernatural encounter. Instead of engaging in a display of power, his response invokes a higher authority, reflecting a deliberate effort to preserve the integrity of what Moses represented. In that moment, the story moves beyond the physical remains and into the realm of meaning, highlighting how legacies can be shaped or warped depending on who holds influence over the symbols left behind. The burial in an unknown location becomes more than a detail, it becomes a safeguard against the temptation to elevate the physical above the spiritual, a barrier preventing the transformation of memory into something that even Moses himself would have rejected. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that the protection surrounding Moses sought not only to honor his life, but to shield future generations from being drawn away by something that appeared sacred but carried the seeds of deception. The absence of a tomb forces attention back to his teachings, his leadership, and his unwavering commitment to a purpose beyond his own identity. In this way, the narrative turns the hidden grave into an act of preservation, ensuring that the people would not build their trust on relics or monuments, but on the message that had guided them through the wilderness. All of this weaves together into a compelling portrait of a moment where spiritual and historical threads intertwine. The unseen effort to prevent misuse of Moses' body reinforces the idea that legacies can be both powerful and vulnerable, needing protection not from physical threats alone, but from distortion and misinterpretation. Through this lens, the story becomes not only a reflection on the past, but a reminder of the delicate balance between memory and meaning, and how easily one can become a doorway to something far removed from its original truth. The moment when Moses was denied entry into the promised land adds a poignant and deeply human dimension to the unfolding story, binding together the secrecy of his burial, the celestial dispute over his body, and the potential misuse of his legacy. In Numbers 20, the scene at the waters of Meribah becomes a turning point. Faced with a frustrated and thirsty people, Moses instructed to speak to the rock, allowing water to flow through, an act of calm obedience. Instead, in a moment of pressure and emotion, he strikes the rock with his staff, an action that seems small on the surface but carries profound implications beneath it. This act becomes the reason he is not allowed to enter the land he had spent decades journeying toward, revealing how even a revered leader's actions can reshape the direction of a story. This episode intensifies the weight surrounding Moses' final moments and the need to protect the meaning of his life. His misstep did not erase his legacy, but it did demonstrate that his authority was never rooted in personal power. It was always tied to a message he was entrusted to carry. By acting differently from what he had been instructed, he inadvertently risked implying that strength and force were the true channels of divine action, when the deeper truth lay in obedience and trust. This misrepresentation of the source of power, subtle though it may seem, had consequences not only for Moses, but for the narrative through which generations would understand the nature of divine authority. When viewed alongside the possibility that adversarial forces intended to manipulate his body or twist his memory, the event at the rock becomes even more significant. It shows how easily a single moment can be exaggerated, reinterpreted, or weaponized in the hands of those who seek influence. If Moses' physical remains could have been used to create confusion or to promote a distorted version of his story, then the hidden burial and the intervention described in Jude appear not as isolated incidents but as essential measures to prevent his legacy from being reshaped into something it was never meant to be. The misstep at Meribah highlights the fragility of perception, how quickly an action can overshadow intention, and underscores why the protection surrounding Moses did not end with his final breath. This perspective also casts a different light on the moment he viewed the Promised Land from afar. It becomes more than a bittersweet ending. It becomes a continuation of the theme that had defined his entire journey. Moses' role was to guide, to carry the people forward, and to reveal a truth greater than himself. Yet he was never meant to become the object of their devotion. By ending his journey outside the land, the narrative reinforces that the fulfillment of the promise did not depend on his presence, but on the enduring message he had delivered. In that, his final moments mirror the hidden burial that followed. They both protect the focus of the story from centering too heavily on the man, rather than on the purpose he served. Through this lens, the intertwining events form a single narrative thread, a revered leader entrusted with a mission, a moment of human frailty that carried profound consequences, a celestial confrontation over the meaning of his legacy, and a hidden resting place designed to preserve the essence of what he represented. Together they create a story that speaks to responsibility, humility, and the careful stewardship of influence, reminding readers that even the most significant lives can be vulnerable to distortion unless safeguarded with intention and wisdom. The moment when Michael confronts the adversary using the simple declaration, "The Lord rebuke you," brings the entire story into sharper focus, tying together the hidden burial of Moses, the risk of deception surrounding his legacy, and the consequences of misrepresenting divine intent. This brief exchange, preserved in Jude's account, reveals a dynamic completely unlike the conflicts that shape human history. There is no display of force, no dramatic clash, and no assertion of personal power. Instead, the scene unfolds with a calm and deliberate invocation of higher authority, emphasizing that true strength in the spiritual realm is not measured by self-assertion, but by alignment with a purpose greater than oneself. This moment becomes an anchor for understanding everything that surrounds the final chapter of Moses' life, illuminating why such extraordinary measures were taken to guard not only his body but the meaning of his story. Michael's response also illustrates the nature of the dispute itself. If an adversarial force sought to twist Moses' legacy or to use his remains as a tool for influence, then the confrontation was not about possession in a physical sense, but about the power to shape memory, perception, and belief. By refusing to enter into a contest of strength, Michael demonstrates that the preservation of truth does not depend on dramatic acts, but on unwavering commitment to the authority that defines what is right. This restraint contrasts sharply with the kind of distortion that might have arisen had Moses' body become an object of manipulation. It becomes a powerful reminder that the struggle over his legacy was rooted not in force, but in meaning, and that safeguarding that meaning required clarity rather than spectacle. Seen in this light, the episode echoes the moment at Meribah, where Moses' action striking the rock instead of speaking to it carried far-reaching implications. There, a display of force overshadowed the intended message, revealing how easily an action can shift the focus away from the deeper truth. By contrast, Michael's deliberate refusal to rely on personal strength restores that message, emphasizing that authority derives not from visible power, but from alignment with the source of that power. This connection forms a narrative bridge between Moses' human moment of weakness and the celestial act of protection that followed, showing how both scenes revolve around the integrity of the message rather than the elevation of the messenger. The confrontation also enhances the significance of Moses' hidden burial. The secrecy was not merely to conceal a location. It served to maintain the purity of his legacy, to prevent any attempt to elevate his physical remains into something that distracted from the path he had worked tirelessly to illuminate. Michael's invocation of authority affirms that the preservation of this legacy required more than guarding a grave, it required guarding the meaning behind the life that grave represented. In this way, the celestial dispute becomes a continuation of the care that shaped Moses' final moments, ensuring that nothing compromised the message he had delivered throughout his journey. As the story comes together, each element reinforces the others. Moses' misstep at the rock reveals the weight of misrepresenting divine intention. The hidden burial protects his legacy from becoming a tool of deception. The possibility of manipulation by adversarial forces exposes why such protection was necessary. And Michael's quiet yet resolute invocation of higher authority provides the final lens through which the entire narrative can be understood. Together these threads create a rich and continuous story, one that moves from the wilderness to the unseen realm, from human frailty to celestial guardianship, and from the risk of distortion to the preservation of truth. The idea that what is good can be subtly reshaped into something misleading weaves naturally into the ongoing narrative of Moses' final chapter, connecting the hidden burial, the supernatural dispute, and the quiet authority displayed by Michael. The story has already shown how easily a moment of misrepresentation at Meribah could shift the focus away from the deeper truth. And this warning deepens that theme by revealing how even the most meaningful gifts can become distorted when lifted beyond their intended place. Throughout history, people have transformed symbols, achievements, relationships, and even sacred objects into points of devotion, allowing admiration to grow into attachment and attachment to grow into something that overshadows the very purpose those gifts were meant to serve. The possibility that Moses' body could have met such a fate fits seamlessly into this pattern, illuminating why extraordinary measures were taken to guard his legacy. This perspective casts the secrecy of Moses' burial in a richer, more compelling light. The burial was not an attempt to remove him from memory, but to protect the people from the subtle shift that can occur when reverence slides into fixation. Moses had been central to their journey, a figure of extraordinary leadership and courage. But his role was never meant to become the foundation of their devotion. If his resting place had been known, it could have easily grown into a site of ritual importance, drawing hearts toward the memory of the man rather than the path he pointed toward. Over time, his legacy could have transformed from a guiding story into a symbol inaccurately representing the purpose he had spent his life revealing. This danger becomes even clearer when viewed alongside the possibility of adversarial influence. If what is good can be reshaped into something distracting, then Moses' body presented an opportunity for manipulation. A grave could be turned into a monument, and a monument into a tool, redirecting attention toward ideas or narratives that conflicted with the truth Moses had lived to uphold. The celestial dispute described in Jude begins to reflect not merely a clash over physical remains, but a struggle over the meaning attached to those remains. In that moment, Michael's reliance on higher authority, rather than personal strength, becomes an affirmation that truth is best preserved through clarity and humility, not through force or spectacle. This warning about the corruption of good things also echoes the moment at Meribah, where Moses' action, though understandable in its context, inadvertently shifted attention toward a display of force. The consequences he faced reveal how easily the perception of an event can become intertwined with the message it carries. When strength replaces trust, or when an action conveys something different from its intended meaning, misunderstanding can spread far beyond the moment itself. By protecting Moses' resting place, the narrative ensures that no such misunderstanding could grow into a long-lasting source of confusion or misplaced devotion. Together these threads form a continuous story about the delicate balance between memory and meaning. Moses' leadership, his vulnerability at Meribah, the secrecy of his burial, the celestial confrontation, and the warning about turning good things into idols all reinforce one another. They show a world in which legacies can be powerful yet fragile, where even the most profound gifts can become obstacles if elevated beyond their purpose. Through this lens, the story becomes not only a reflection on Moses' final moments, but also a reminder that the preservation of truth often requires protecting it from the subtle shifts that can change its direction. The account of Jesus responding to temptation with the steady declaration it is written draws the narrative toward a natural culmination, echoing the principle that has quietly shaped every moment in Moses' final chapter. The story has shown again and again that true strength does not lie in dramatic displays or in the force of one's own will, but in a steady alignment with something greater than individual power. When Jesus responds to each challenge not by arguing, resisting physically, or asserting his own authority, but by grounding himself in what has already been spoken, he models the same pattern seen in Michael's quiet declaration and in the protective measures surrounding Moses' legacy. This continuity creates a unified thread running from the wilderness of Meribah, through the hidden grave on Mount Nebo, all the way to the moment of spiritual testing in the desert. When viewed through this lens, the connection to Moses becomes clearer and more compelling. Moses' misstep at the rock was not simply an act of frustration. It was a moment where action overshadowed intention, where the message conveyed did not fully reflect the source of the power behind it. In contrast, Jesus' response during temptation shows what it looks like when every word and action remains perfectly aligned with that source, allowing truth to speak for itself without being clouded by emotion or self-reliance. This alignment becomes the defining characteristic of real authority, the kind that does not need force to be effective. It is the same principle that shaped Michael's refusal to escalate the celestial dispute, demonstrating that victory comes not from personal strength but from unwavering reliance on what is already true. This understanding reinforces why Moses' resting place was concealed and why the potential misuse of his body posed such danger. Had his remains become an object of misguided devotion, or had adversarial forces succeeded in shaping his memory into something distorted, the people could have found themselves leaning on symbols, monuments, or narratives that derived their power from emotion rather than truth. Such attachments might have drawn them toward effort-driven devotion, rather than reliance on the message Moses spent his life proclaiming. By hiding his burial site, the narrative protects the community from this subtle shift, ensuring that their focus remained on the path set before them, rather than on the relics of the one who guided them. The warning that what is good can become corrupted if elevated beyond its purpose also dovetails naturally with this theme. Success, gifts, and meaningful relationships can all become burdens when they are lifted into the place meant for truth alone. In the same way, Moses' leadership was never intended to become an object of devotion, and his body, if misused, could have become a symbol that overshadowed the very message he delivered. The principle seen in Jesus' temptation provides the antidote to this danger. Clarity, humility, and alignment with what is written, rather than reliance on personal effort or the allure of symbols. As the narrative threads come together, they reveal a consistent pattern stretching across time and circumstance. Moses' moment of misrepresentation at Meribah illustrates the weight carried by even small shifts away from truth. His hidden burial guards against the possibility that his legacy might be twisted into something misleading. The celestial dispute highlights the importance of preserving the meaning attached to his life. The warning about misplaced devotion shows how easily good things can become obstacles. And Jesus' reliance on the written word demonstrates the path by which clarity is restored and victory is found. Taken together, these elements form a single, continuous story about how authority, truth, and legacy are protected not by force or effort, but by remaining aligned with the source from which all genuine authority flows. Scripture is often portrayed as something written and preserved, but the ancient texts describe it as far more dynamic, alive, active, and capable of cutting through confusion with clarity and purpose. Ephesians calls it the sword of the Spirit, a tool not of aggression but of illumination, carrying the power to separate truth from distortion. Hebrews deepens this idea by portraying the word as something that reaches into the innermost places of thought and intention, revealing what is real beneath the surface. In this way, the authority that shaped Moses' story, the restraint shown by Michael, and the unwavering clarity displayed by Jesus all find their foundation in the same enduring source. When Moses' legacy needed protection from distortion, truth not force was the safeguard. When Michael faced a moment that could have escalated into conflict, truth not personal strength was his defense. When Jesus encountered temptation in the wilderness, truth not argument or effort became his answer. In each moment, the spoken word carried the power to silence confusion, expose deception, and anchor purpose. This same pattern continues into the lives of those who walk in that tradition. When spoken with understanding, the word becomes more than a text. It becomes a stabilizing presence, aligning hearts with clarity that cannot be overshadowed by fear, misinterpretation, or distraction. The story of Moses' final chapter reveals how fragile meaning can be if separated from truth, and how easily symbols, memories, and even good intentions can drift into something that pulls attention in the wrong direction. Yet it also shows how deliberately that meaning was preserved, from the hidden burial, to the celestial dispute, to the warning against turning good things into objects of devotion. Through it all, one principle remains constant: genuine authority flows from alignment with truth, and truth retains its power when spoken, remembered, and lived. Scripture stands at the center of that alignment. It speaks into confusion when emotions cloud perspective. It becomes a shield when imitation and distortion threaten clarity. It offers strength when effort alone falls short. And it reminds believers that they do not face the challenges of belief, purpose, or identity alone. Each moment in this story, human, hidden, or heavenly, points back to the enduring power of truth spoken with conviction. Thank you for spending this time exploring one of the most intriguing and meaningful narratives woven through ancient scripture. If this journey has helped you see the story with new depth, or has given you something valuable to think about, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support ensures that more stories like this can come to life, offering insight, clarity, and a deeper understanding of the threads that connect history.